Hello, what's up everyone? Welcome to this new live stream, and this time we're going to talk about a topic that I'm quite excited about because I've been thinking about doing this kind of live stream for maybe close to 1 year, and it actually took me some time to just get to the point where like I had no other topic in mind and I was like, okay, now is the time, let's do it. So today we're going to look at the code base of a real world popular iOS app. So an iOS app that's in production that you can download on the App Store and that's being used by a significant amount of users. So how comes that we can actually take a look at the code of such an app? The reason is that there are many popular iOS apps which are actually open source. Some of them are pretty well known. You could think, for instance, of VLC, the media player app. You've got other apps like, for instance, in messaging, you've got Signal, Telegram, which are open source. You have also in a different domain, but the Kickstarter app is also open source and was a bit famous at some point because people who implemented it followed a lot of functional programming patterns in the code base. But for this first live stream with this concept of taking a look at the code of a popular iOS app, I chose an app in particular, and it's the Wikipedia app. So why did I choose this app? The reason is that it might not be the most popular one because Wikipedia, the website is still good enough that, like me, for instance, I don't have this app installed on my phone. I search on Google, I see a Wikipedia link, and I go on the Wikipedia website. So I might have chosen apps that I use more. For instance, I use VLC. I don't use Signal, but I've used Telegram. But the reason why I chose Wikipedia is because my feeling is that it might be the closest in terms of use cases to your typical iOS app, which retrieves data from web services, displays this data on the screen in a nice UI, and maybe collects some data from the user and sends it back to the backend. VLC, for instance, it's a media app. You can consider that the code base is probably very specialized. There is a good chance that the iOS app is just a wrapper around some core functionalities which are written maybe in C++, maybe in C. Same thing for instant messaging, where it's a very interesting use case, but unless you need to implement a chat in your app, you're less likely to benefit from what you will learn. But on the other hand, for an app like Wikipedia, I had this feeling that most of what we're going to learn can probably translate on the kind of apps that most iOS developers work on a daily basis. So I have some rough idea of what I want to cover in this live stream, but please, if you are watching live, if there is anything that you want me to have a look inside the code base, to comment, to try to answer, please let me know in the chat. That's really the big advantage of being live. So I can tell you what I have in mind, for instance. I'm going to want to take a look at where the app starts, so probably in the app delegate. Sorry, I've eaten before, and eating before you're speaking is never a great idea. So I want to have a look at the app delegate, where the app starts, the entry point of the app. I want to have a look also at the big picture architecture of the app, and likely the app delegate will also let us know about it, because we'll see like what's happening in the app delegate. Like, is a coordinator being created? Is it a master view controller? We'll see how it goes. Then I want to have a look at one of the main screen of the app. So typically the screen to see the content of a Wikipedia article that might be very interesting, to see how it's implemented. I probably also want to have a look at how network calls are implemented, because network calls, it's what's basically the common denominator for most, if not all, iOS apps. So it's interesting to see how a popular app like this one is handling it. Especially, I want to see if there is some kind of caching implemented, so that the data is not fetched again if you look at the same article twice in a short amount of time. Same thing, is there an offline mode, for instance? That would be interesting to have a look at. That's more than enough for the intro. I've been speaking for almost 5 minutes, so let's actually get started. Behind me, what you see is the GitHub repo that contains the code base. So what I did is I simply downloaded it as a zip. You can clone it, of course, if you prefer, but if you want to get started easily, you can download as a zip. Just before you get started, make sure to read the README, and you want to read this part right here where they tell you to run some script, which is going to install Homebrew and then install a few dependencies. And once that's done, you can open the Xcode project and you can build the app for the simulator, and you should be ready to go. So actually, I was surprised that I didn't struggle too much. If you've ever had to be onboarded on a large iOS project, you know how often it can happen that setting up the project and getting it to build correctly for the first time can be quite a journey. Thankfully, it wasn't the case here. So I have the project here open in Xcode. I can build it for the simulator. Actually, I'm going to build it and run it so that you can see it appear on the screen. And I see a few people saying hi in the chat. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this new live stream. Welcome to the last live stream before the WWDC. Because next week there will not be a live stream. Or maybe there will be one, but then it will be live from the WWDC, so maybe it will be interesting. I'm not sure if I will try to do a live stream while I'm there, but maybe try to post some videos. I will try, we'll see. So this is the last live stream before the WWDC, yeah. So this is the Wikipedia app, the one that you can get from the App Store. So there is some onboarding. You know what? Let's have a look like this screen right here. Let's try to capture the UI just to see, is it UIKit or is it SwiftUI? Because I'm curious to see what does this screen look like. So let's see. Let me hide this. Okay, so it seems that we are in a UIKit world. So WMF, I think it's Wikimedia Foundation, what it stands for. So welcome animation background view controller. Okay, so it's all UIKit. We'll see if there is some SwiftUI. We'll try to see that. But this is all UIKit. And what's interesting is that we can see that the app uses sub view controllers, or rather child view controllers, quite a lot. Because if we look here, we can see that this thing here, so this image, is actually a view controller of its own. What might be possible is that maybe this is like controlled by some data fetched on the backend. And so the data says, okay, here we need an image, and then the app instantiates an image view controller, or rather an animation background view controller. Because I guess this must be like some kind of like Lottie animation. So that's quite interesting to see. So first, that's interesting because if someone has ever told you like, child view controllers, are you sure that it scales that well? Well, now you have your answer because these people, they are using it everywhere, and the app seems to be fine. So that answers your question. And that's also one of the reasons why I like these open source apps, because it gives you the opportunity to see how an actual app that's been used by a real user has chosen to solve a given problem. And when you need to solve a problem that's in a similar space, it can be extremely insightful. I can give you an example. At work, something like a year ago, one of my colleagues was looking at the best way to ask the user to pick a picture from their camera roll in the way that had the less friction in the user experience. As you know, I worked on an app that is about photography, so being able to select a picture from your camera roll without too much friction is kind of super important in the UX. And so what my colleague did is that he looked at the apps like Signal or Telegram to see how they were handling this ability of the user to pick an image from the camera roll, and it was quite insightful to see how each app was doing it. So I see a few messages. So how do you see a view hierarchy when it's a SwiftUI view? That's a good question. When it's a SwiftUI view, very often you see something, but everything is like flattened and you don't have the hierarchy in detail. You still see the content, but it's much more flattened indeed. Especially if the SwiftUI content is rendered in SwiftUI. If it's just SwiftUI or wrapping around UIKit, you can see the UIKit part usually. But as time goes by, SwiftUI handles more and more things natively. And you said never press that button before, so let me just show again on the live stream which button I pressed. So it was this button, so this one right here, which allows you to open, I don't know how it's called, maybe if I stay over it, is the debug view hierarchy button. And yeah, someone mentioned it. Thank you. So it's very useful. Word of warning, it works way better with the simulator than with an actual device. With a device, it tends to like, at least in my experience, it tends to not work. Basically, like it says unable to load or something like that. But with the simulator, I think most of the time for me it worked. I struggle remembering times where I didn't work in the simulator. So and that's a pretty useful tool to know like which type, especially know the name of the type of a view controller. It's a great way to like zero in onto the view controller that's responsible for something that's being shown on the screen. All right, and of course I need to relaunch the app. I mean, not to relaunch, but to resume the app. So let's get started. So we can see that some data has been fetched, so that's quite interesting. And let's choose, so we have this article, the donor party. I thought it was dinner party, but no, it's something else. And so let's see what, no, I was about to say, let's see what this view controller is made of, but first I had a plan, so I'm going to stick to my plan, at least a bit. So let's look at the app delegate. Oh, can you see that? .m, so it's in Objective-C. So not the full project is in Swift. There is still some traces of Objective-C. Great question. Does this app use the coordinator pattern? We'll see that just soon. We'll see basically what's being created in the app delegate. So you can see it's quite an old code base because you have like static constants being created like that inside a .m file. So if you've ever written Objective-C code, this might bring back some memories. So you can see here some properties defined in an extension private to the class. And so what do we have in application? This finish launching with options. Yeah, when you're not used to it, it kind of looks scary. Like imagine when I started in 2011 when you had only Objective-C. Not even Objective-C, no, it was Objective-C 2.0, but not modern syntax. So you couldn't subscript an array. For instance, you had to say my array object at index. So call a method. And yeah, you had this like angle braces everywhere, plus manual memory management. It was definitely a different time. So in did finish launching with option, what it does is it just calls register background task for application. And you can see that there is background BG task scheduler. I don't know about that, but apparently it does exist. It's the first time I hear about that, or maybe I heard about it and then I forgot about it. But okay. Oh, so it's when you want to run background tasks. Okay. So what's interesting is that since this is the only thing happening, maybe actually we have a storyboard that launches the app, because here I see a task, so that is going to do app view controller perform background fetch with completion. Okay. What is this app view controller? We'll see where it's created. And here, okay, so it's for fetching data in the background. But what is this app controller? So oh no, I'm okay. I hadn't noticed. I think okay. I thought there was only that, but no. Then there is more things. Just like I thought that this was the end of the method, but no. Okay, there is other stuff. Okay, so it does something on user default. Okay, some migration code. It seems. Something about whether it should restart navigation stack. Okay. App needs resume, so it's something about managing the previous state. And then, so here it creates what's called the app view controller. So it creates it in code, doing alloc init. So this is like doing calling an initializer on in Swift. The only difference is that alloc allocates the space in memory, and then init initializes it. And in Swift, when you create a class by calling the initializer, these two things are happening together. So you cannot dissociate them, but you could do it in Objective-C. and you had to do it. Okay, so then we set some kind of delegate, and then it's launch app in window, so it's starting the app. Okay, so what is this WMF app view controller? I want to see, I'm capturing the debug view hierarchy again, because I want to see like, okay, so no, here we have WMF root navigation controller and then article view controller. So the app view controller is something else. So what's inside of this? So it's a tab bar controller. Okay, let's look. We do have it. Oh, okay, because okay, so we have the tab bar here. So when I looked, okay, yeah, there is this transition happening, and so we go from the I guess this is the WMF app view controller. So let's see. Can I see it? Yes. Can you see it? Let me try to zoom. So root navigation controller, and then inside of it, the WMF app view controller. Okay. And then the explore view controller, which is shown here. Basically, the WMF app view controller is a subclass of UI tab bar controller. So it's interesting to see that there is a pattern that is way more MVC, which can make sense in a way, because if the app was created a long time ago, the coordinator pattern wasn't that popular or even existing back then. When was I was looking to see if there is if there was like a header with the creation year, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And I don't think I have a Git repository. I'm trying to see if I do source control. I'm gonna enable it just to see if I can see something interesting. No, because I didn't. I regret not cloning the repo, because we could have seen when the file was created. But actually, you know what? I can just go into GitHub. I can do like. You want to see the folder structure? Yeah. So let's do find. No, navigate or reveal in Project Navigator. So we have the Wikipedia project, Wikipedia group, then a group called code. We have model, view controllers, views, and application. And you can see that this app view controller is really at the application level. And you can see that we have here the WMF app view controller, which is in Objective-C. And then there are extensions written in Swift. And so it's a subclass of UI tab bar controller that does things like showing the splash view. Maybe it also shows the onboarding. This is quite a file, because if we look, this file is almost a bit more than 2,000 lines long. The implementation, the .m file. So that's quite a file. This is more archaeology, to be honest, in the sense that I wouldn't recommend, if you're an iOS developer working with Swift on modern apps, I wouldn't recommend that you spend a ton of time looking at this code. It's interesting to know like how things have evolved since the beginnings of iOS, but this is not going to give you a lot of skills that you will be able to reuse in your day-to-day job. So to say it differently, like I'm not sure that the return on time invested will be the best by spending too much time delving into these .h or .m files. And you're saying you already checked there are no headers in any Objective-C or Swift files, no authors, no dates. Maybe we can actually just do one thing. So I'm going to take the name of the file. I'm going to search through it here. So like that. Actually, yeah, the file is here. And so let's see. Can I see when it was created? I can do a blame and I can see. Yeah, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, Swift already exists, but Swift is very new, because Swift was released like 10 years ago, I think yesterday or something like that. And yeah, MVVM and coordinators, it's around 2015. Coordinators, I know it's Soroush Kanlu who talked about it a lot. But when you are 8 years ago, so you are in 2016, 2015, 2016. Swift has just been released, but most iOS developers don't have a strong experience with Swift yet. Also, Swift, the first version, was kind of like SwiftUI, the first version. It was nice, but maybe not the most production ready, in the sense that big improvement to the language would be introduced. For instance, the whole protocol-oriented programming was introduced with Swift 2, so not with the first version. And then it's mostly Swift 3, which did like the great rename and that laid like the foundations. And after that, it felt safe to start building on Swift. So yeah, 2015, 2016, like some new projects would probably use Swift as the default, but projects that were already existing before, they definitely still relied on Objective-C. But it's very interesting to see a code base that spans across like 8 or maybe more than 8 years, because it's quite rare to see like such a long existing code base that's still maintained and still used in production by many users, because apps in the company, in the corporate realm, usually you've got the very big ones, so WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, that bring in a lot of revenue, and they will not move a lot, in the sense that they bring in so much revenue that rewriting them is a major risk with not too many upsides. But any kind of like app created by some agency or some smaller company, it's either the app has been rewritten, or the company went under, or what the app did is no longer relevant. But it's very rare to see such old code bases still in production when you're doing like a regular job that is not on a very big, very high profile app. And unfortunately, such old code bases in the real world, usually they are often a bad sign, because it's often the project has been like abandoned, and that keeps being maintained just because you have to, but that nobody wants to work on. Interesting. You say, I bet it uses user defaults for caching. I'm not sure that would scale super well, to be honest, especially back in the days. But we'll see how it does for caching. So you know what? Let's go back into the project. Let's go back into the app. And so let's see the name of this controller, which shows the content of an article, which is arguably the main use case of an app like Wikipedia. So let's see. It's called WMF Article View Controller. Okay, you're saying, Emmanuel, the main app that I work on is 9 years old, and we did rewrite it in Swift. Yeah, because at some point, unless you're like Instagram and your app makes a ton of revenue, and so you can afford to pay people a ton of money to work on it, plus you're already super prestigious and highly selective and everything like that. Otherwise, your regular company which keeps an app in a very old code base, at some point, no one wants to work on it, because working on it is very hazardous to your career and your like employability. And so just because of that, companies they are incentivized to doing rewriting. And yeah, 2015. So 2015, I still remember on which kind of apps I was working on. I was working on apps that were about like food and connected Bluetooth-enabled kitchen appliances. I won't give the name of the company because I'm not sure like if I'm allowed to. But the app we were working on, so I'd been created a few years before, and yeah, it was definitely like MVC plus services, and this was considered like state of the art in 2013, 2014, when the project had been launched. One thing that was very interesting to mention back then, especially in France, is that in France, usually people who went into iOS development were pretty young, and there were not that many experienced developers who went into iOS, or rather the few that did, they were very good people technically, and so they were on high profile jobs. But for the like regular developers working on regular apps, it was mostly younger people who hadn't done any kind of like backend or big software development before, who had just graduated, kind of like me, and so you could feel it in the architectures because it was already a struggle to get up to date with the platform, and so doing also architecture was like adding a struggle on top of another. And so I think that's one of the reasons also why maybe apps were lacking a bit in terms of maturity in architecture back then. And also back then apps were bringing much less in revenue than what they do today. Like we didn't have subscription apps back then. Apps like Uber, I think Uber had just launched in France, but the days of apps being super successful and paying software engineers a lot of money to get really good engineers were still a few days away. At least for people in France. Might have been a bit different in the US, but in France it was mostly like small-time agencies doing mobile apps and companies, like bigger companies doing it, but usually by hiring like contractors. So like people are not really like skin in the game, and people don't really have a strong incentive to make a great product basically because they get paid the same either way. And whether or not they make double effort is not going to bring them a lot in exchange. So one of the kind of problems that you can find when you only hire contractors and not greatly paid contractors to work on your project. But I'm going off topic, so let's go back. I wanted to look at a view controller called WMF Article View Controller. No, I see some tests, so it will be interesting to look also at the tests at some point. But wait, why can't I find it? What was the name? I forgot because I went into this like off topic. But so, okay, it's WMF Article View Controller. Yeah, I'm not dreaming. So why, when I did Command Shift O and then WMF Article View, why don't I see it here? Like, am I crazy or what? Oh, okay. Because it's just article view controller for the type, and then there is this alias for Objective-C. Okay, so I wasn't going crazy. There was a reason why I didn't find it when doing Command Shift O. And we've learned an edge case of Command Shift O, by the way. Okay, so we have some view state. So it's interesting. View state, it's already some kind of like pattern to try and better represent the state that your controller can go through. So it's interesting to have this approach. Okay, so we have this article view controller, which is a subclass of view controller. So you can see that there is like a hierarchy. So view controller is a subclass of themable view controller. So also a very common pattern of relying a lot on inheritance to add features and to add very common features and make them available all the way throughout your app. I definitely worked in apps that had this similar pattern back then. So we have the view state, so initial, loading, reloading, loaded, or error. So very similar to what you could find in SwiftUI today. So interesting to see this being implemented here. And we can see that this class is fully in Swift. So maybe this class in particular was rewritten in Swift at some point, because we can imagine that the Wikipedia app always had to have a class to display the articles, and initially we can make the hypothesis that it must have been in Objective-C and then it was rewritten in Swift at some point. Actually, let's try to have a look and to see when was the article viewcontroller.swift file created. So we can see it's here. And if I look at blame, let's see. Okay, so 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, it puts us at like 2019. So yeah, the kind of time where a rewrite in Swift would have totally made sense. Okay, so we have the view state. We have so some UI being created here with lazy properties. Yeah, you say Swift wasn't really ready for prime time until after Swift 3. Swift 2, and especially like one of the subversion of Swift 2 was already like pretty nice. And between Swift 2 and Swift 3, there wasn't such a strong difference between Swift 1 and Swift 2 besides the great renaming, and the fact that that Swift 3 also slowed down compilation times quite a lot. You might remember that, especially if you didn't have like some super powered MacBook Pros at work like I used to back then. Projects that would take 10 minutes to build were a thing back then. That was quite a crazy time. Okay. So here we have what seems to be the model, so the article, the media list, okay. So we look at what is inside the article after. The article URL, this one is public and exposed to Objective-C. Article language code, because I guess you can switch language from within the article. Yeah, you can do it here, okay. And then we have completion handlers. So it seems that we are in the realm of completion handlers for this app. So it means that the app was using like what Apple was suggesting. There is no use of a library like Eric Swift, for instance, which wouldn't have existed back when it was created because Swift wasn't there yet. But there was a reactive Cocoa, which already existed back then. But it makes sense that for such an app, which is going to be implemented in open source and might rely a lot on contributors, to do something that like has minimal adherence to third-party frameworks. This way, anyone who knows iOS virtually knows how to contribute to the app, provided that they learn how it works under the hood. But there is no having no specific knowledge required is a pretty good thing when you're doing an open source app, especially if you rely on external contributors. Okay, we have a data store. So I think this stores the data. So session configuration and authentication manager. Okay, a fetcher. Okay, so let's see actually what's happening in view did load, because this is where usually interesting stuff happens. Ah, interesting. You say that this app has a lot of deprecated code and there is not very much that new developer can learn. What app do you recommend that has new open source code? I didn't say that it has a lot of deprecated code. What I said was that the part in Objective-C, they were maybe not the most interesting and the most useful usage of your time if your goal is to learn a lot about current iOS quickly. However, this screen that we are having a look at, for instance, there are many apps today that might be implemented in a way that is similar to what we are saying. So I think this screen is a good example of seeing how a very complex screen looks like. Provided it would probably be better to split things maybe a bit more, but still I think this one that we're having a look at is a good example. And for a good example of a modern open source app, I don't have anything that comes to mind right now, but I know that there are lists available. If you search on Google for list of open source iOS apps, you have a list available. I think there is even one list like that on Wikipedia, and another one, I think there is a GitHub repo which lists them also. So I would recommend that you have a look at this and you try to find apps that are maybe similar to the space that you are working on, that you would be interested to work on, and then look for more recent apps. But just keep in mind one thing is that more recent might not mean better quality. Like you might have an app that is very recent but is badly implemented. But I see what you mean in the sense that, for instance, if you're looking to learn about Swift UI, typically the Wikipedia app is probably not the place for you. Actually, you know what? Let's do a quick search. Let's search for Swift UI just to see if it's there. There is some Swift UI. There is a bit of it. It's interesting. You can see that there are some like, oh, here we have the onboarding, for instance. So here the onboarding seems to use Swift UI. So it's interesting, especially because, okay, it's a hosting view controller. Okay, so it uses, okay. So it's interesting because what we saw when we looked at the onboarding and which I took for child view controllers, actually, they are hosting view controllers which are using Swift UI under the hood. Okay. So that's interesting. We will have a look at the Swift UI views just after. It's gonna be very interesting to have a look at that. Oh, Critical Mass app is nice for TCA, for example. I didn't know about this app, so thank you for mentioning it. You know what? I'm gonna do a screenshot on my end of your comment so that I can remember to check this out after. Okay, I wanted to search for view did load. So let's search for it. View did load right here. So we have a setup, super view did load, setup toolbar, and then setup for state restoration if necessary, self article. There is a controller for a survey, so maybe to rate the app or to give your opinion. Okay, I'm looking to see maybe actually what's going into all of these view did loads. No, it just applies the theme, so there is no like loading mechanism. Maybe it's in setup. What's happening here in setup? So it sets up some buttons, a web view. There is a web view. That's interesting. If there is a web view, maybe this means that this right here is actually just a web view. You know what? Let's have a look. Yeah, because you can see that there is, where there is the article, there is nothing. So here there is a UI view, and then an image view, okay? And here, oh yes. So interestingly, this is a web view actually. What shows the article is a web view. Uh, in a way, it can make sense because it's all about showing text with formatting. Formatting is already implemented in the web, so using a web view for this specific part, in a way, kind of makes sense. But you see that the image here is rendered natively. Maybe because it looks better that way. I don't know why. Or maybe because then you can click on it and do stuff that you couldn't do with a web page. Okay, so this is actually no, it seems that the click you can do it with, but maybe when you click, actually the web view like intercepts the click. But okay, so this is a web view that we are seeing. And so what happens like here? Is it still a web view? Let's see. Okay, so NYT photo view controller. So I guess maybe it's a third-party tool made by the New York Times. And here we have a UI page controller and then a media list gallery view controller. So I guess what's happening is that the article view controller is going to get the click from the web view by being the navigation delegate of the web view, and then it's going to present. Yeah, you can see that it's the navigation delegate. So I think it gets the click on the web view and then redirects to a native view. So it's a very interesting pattern. So let me see actually the part where the delegate is implemented. I'm looking to see if it's in this file. So let me check for navigation delegate. Yes, it's here. So you can see that what it does is that, so when there is a navigation action, so if it's a reload or other, it allows it. Otherwise, it cancels, so it does nothing. And what does it do here? So here it basically does the same thing. And I'm looking to see, because it must trigger, oh, maybe this is this thing, because here it says, okay. Okay, so no, I don't think it's that. What does this thing do? So it just creates, yeah, it creates some load group, but trying to understand how does it, because it's getting the click on the you're saying it's decide policy, yeah, so it's this one right here. And doing a cancel makes sense because you tell the web view don't do anything, I will handle it in a different way. But then, you know what? What I can do is that I can try and look again. So um, at the name of the thing being shown. So it's a media list gallery view controller. And let's see if one is created inside this file. Media list gallery. No. Oh, it might use a WebKit handler. Okay, I haven't heard of WebKit handler up until now. So let's see what these are. So if I search for handler, there is this thing called a scheme handler. I don't know what it does. Or maybe, yeah, maybe they could have like, yes. Oh, I think, oh, if you mean WebKit handler, you mean the API where you can call a function in JavaScript in the page and it actually calls a native method in your app. Yes, this one I see how it works, and maybe that's this. So actually, let's have a look at the class which implements the web view. So where is it? I saw it just before. Wait, I saw it at some point. Where was it? This web view. You know what? I'm going to search just for like web view. Okay, we have the web view which is here, and so the web view. So it's a WK web view, and maybe it's in the configuration that's being set. No, not here. It seems. Yeah, not here. It seems. So maybe it's being set somewhere else. Maybe in view did load. So here it loads the request. And how is the request made? It's made from so fetcher from the article URL. So you see it's in the configuration probably. So I will have a look at it. Have a look back at it just after. But here it doesn't do that. Okay, it's something about themes. No, once again about applying a theme. Not that, not that, not that, not that, not that. Okay, setup web view. So we have the delegate. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for the code that would be triggered by the native code that would be triggered by JavaScript calls inside the web view. So what's called a WebKit handler, and I'm looking for where it could be set. So here in the configuration, you can see that there is just a process pool. So I'm not sure that this is it. Oh, interesting. So user content did receive message. Okay. So thank you for that. So user content controller. So let me search for this in the project. User content controller. Seems good. So here we have this in this thing called single page web view controller. Let's once again, what did I want to show you? I wanted to see what's being used here in this view, because I'm sure there is more than one web view in the app, so I want to make sure we will look at the correct place. Okay, so yeah, there is the web view. So I'm just trying to find. So we have this web view over here. Yeah, it seems very responsive and very nice to use. Granted that people who do Wikipedia are probably very knowledgeable about everything about web, so web engineering. So that kind of makes sense. But interestingly, here you can see that there is, here there is a configuration created. So WebView configuration, and then there is this WK user content controller. And what does it do? A way for JavaScript to post messages to a WebView. Okay, so this is what we are looking for. So let's see if this is created in other places. So we have the preview here, and then it's article web messaging. So this seems to be something something different, actually. So looking back here, and I'm looking for user. Yeah, there is no user content. Oh, what was interesting is that if the user taps on the what's called the lead image, so it shows the lead image, and so it does get media list and then show image. So maybe we can see if this method show image is going to be called somewhere else by someone else. And you're saying that you love this kind of stream. Perfect. I'm very glad that you enjoy it. It's very interesting for me to do this kind of stream where I don't know where I'm going, and we'll see where we go, and we have like 2 hours to go wherever we end up. It's very different than when I do a training and I try to have a plan, or I'm following a plan. So very interesting, much more low pressure than what I usually do. Okay, so let's see where this is called. It's only shown here in the show image. But we are in extension. That's why we are no longer in the main file. So maybe this is called from the main file. No, there isn't a show image being showed. Okay. So this shows the gallery view controller. Okay. But how does it? I'm gonna try and see if this is called somewhere. And yeah, indeed, I can always look at the color of the function. I can always do like so here we can see that it's here, and I could always do like right click, find call hierarchy. So this is called here. So find call hierarchy, and this is called did receive. That's interesting. Because link, lead image, footer item, this seems to be the kind of code that reacts to interactions with the content of the article. So interesting, because we also saw this notion of web messaging. I thought, there was this file called article web messaging, and I thought it was about like sending a message to someone about an article, but it seems to be like messaging between the messaging. Yeah, it means messaging between the JavaScript and the iOS app. The term messaging is kind of interesting. So I'm just like, this is pure conjecture, but if you've done Objective-C, you might remember that calling a function in Objective-C is not actually what you do most of the time. When you do like view controller load view, for instance, you're actually sending the message to the object load view, and under the hood, the Objective-C runtime translates this message into the actual method call. There are some subtleties into this, mainly that it's possible to hook or proxy messages. So this basically adds a layer of indirection, but this word of messaging between your objects was this term of messaging between your objects rather than calling methods on your object was something quite popular back in Objective-C. People who watched the very famous CS193P, so the introduction to iOS development from Stanford, might remember that the instructor used to emphasize this quite a lot, the fact that you were messaging between your objects. So the name here might come from that, or it might come from something completely different, and I might just be doing pure conjecture, but hey, was still worth mentioning it. And so if an image is selected, yeah, I think many people learn iOS thanks to CS193p. It was, honestly, it was the missing tutorial back then. These days, honestly, especially in the past like 2 years, Apple has been really, really good at publishing a really good quality tutorials. I mean, I've covered a good number of them during my live stream, so you might be familiar with them. But it's important to remember that absolutely nothing like that existed back then. You had some documentation, but which was usually very technical and which like was basically building on the fact that you already knew what you were doing, but introductory content there wasn't that much of it. And if you've never used About It, you can look for it on YouTube. So you can search for Stanford CS193p, and you will see like I don't know if they have uploaded like all of the courses from all of the years, but there used to be one version each year because they would record the lectures each year, and it was super interesting. It's how I actually got started into iOS. So at the end of 2010, no, not the end of 2010, at the beginning of 2011, when I already knew that I wanted to that I had my first internship in iOS. Okay, so when you select an image in the web view, this gets called, and you call the method showImage. So if you ever need to implement things around web views, the Wikipedia app is actually a very good example because it's an app that uses web views under the hood, but honestly, it's quite well done because it seems like very reactive, and it can show you that you can use a web view actually only as a rendering engine in a way, because Wikipedia already has its content in HTML, so it makes sense that they won't try to reformat it in a native format for iOS, and they're actually using the web view just as a rendering engine. But as soon as you interact with anything, then it goes back into native code. So it's super interesting as an approach. It makes a lot of sense given what Wikipedia is and what their data, how their data is already available, and what expertise the people who worked on the iOS app either had or could rely on. So super interesting. And this makes me curious. Actually, I would be very curious to know, like, I guess the Books app from Apple probably uses like native rendering with core text, but for instance, the Kindle app, does it use WebView or not? If you told me that it uses WebView under the hood, I wouldn't be that much surprised. And yeah, you're saying we used to do it with ebooks to make a reader, especially back in the days. Like my first internship, we were working on digital publishing apps, and it was so in the days of iOS 3 or 4, I don't know, 2011. So iOS 4, I guess. Yeah, iOS 4 was had been released, and you couldn't set an attributed string to a UI label. If you wanted to have attributed text, you had to use core text, and core text version 1 was an Objective not an Objective-C API, a C++ API that was quite like technical and low level. So using a web view wherever you could in very select places was a great way to actually rely on the fact that web browsers are very good at displaying text. That's arguably what they were created for. So it made sense back then, and it still makes sense as of today, because if you wanted to rebuild all of this with a UI text view, you could do it, but having, for instance, images in the middle, having this complex rendering, I'm sure that it would take way more time than using a web view. And also, using a web view in that case for Wikipedia, it has one advantage, is that it means that they likely only need to maintain one single code base for their content, because it's likely that this uses the same CSS than the app does when it's displayed in a mobile browser, so in responsive mode. And this is a very big advantage, because such a complex code base between iOS, Android, the web, and everything, having the same rendering logic implemented correctly the same way on 3 or more different platforms, it's basically like impossible to do it unless you spend crazy resources to ensure that and test things extensively. But when you are like a foundation, you don't have like and you shouldn't spend crazy resources on this kind of topics. So I see a few messages in the chat. Someone saying many reader apps like articles or recipes, etc., still render HTML like this, so it follows web CSS styles. Exactly, because the advantage of having a single code base, especially for something that is like centered to your product, makes a lot of sense. And then since you can always like hook into a native code, it means that basically every link can be treated and act like a button. So even if you want to use like some new APIs, usually you can still do it, because it's only like the rendering logic that you're doing through a web view. And you're saying many payment systems integration went that way. That's true. Sometimes it was also more for not only for security purposes, but like often they were web payment services which became available on mobile, and so they had no intention of implementing a mobile SDK. And also the fact that you would put the payments into a web view, it could improve security. Now, granted, I'm not an expert on the topic, and it might be a fake feeling of security, but the fact that it was running into a web view made it a bit isolated from the rest of the code, and potentially made it safer in the sense that if you had something that had like a malicious framework which had like hooked or swizzled some methods, maybe it would be harder to steal data from the web view than from a native view controller. Once again, this is conjecture, but think about the fact that today you have the SF Safari controller, which is used by many apps to implement a login flow on the web. You still see this ID being used as of today, and even large apps, typically like e-commerce apps, they might have native apps because they want to have their catalog being browsable inside a native UI. But typically for the authentication and sometimes for the payment, they will switch back to a web view, because a web view or an SF Safari view controller or any kind of like web content, because it makes just more sense about it. So that part, indeed, if you do in-app purchase, you have to pay the Apple tax. But usually, this kind of payments, I mean, like if you try to put a web view to buy like consumables in a game, you will have a problem. Basically, I think this is basically the Epic versus Apple lawsuit. I think that's what they try to do. So usually, it's to pay for services which are not, for which is not mandatory to use an in-app purchase. But you're right that there are some cases. I think, for instance, in France, like Netflix, I'm not sure if you maybe not Netflix, but like YouTube, if you pay YouTube Premium like on the web rather than in the iOS app, you get a discount because there is no Apple tax. However, I'm not sure if you can access this payment flow from within the iOS app. I'm not sure what the rules are, because they've changed quite a lot, especially in Europe with the regulations. But if you offer in-app purchase, I don't think that you can offer an alternative payment method. But there are so many edge cases around this. Like, for instance, I saw recently that if you want to buy a Kindle book on the Amazon app on iOS, you can do it in the app, because since it's digital content, Apple makes it mandatory to use in-app purchases and to pay like pay the Apple tax, and so you have to go on the website, maybe using Safari, but you have to go on the website of Amazon to buy a Kindle book because you can't do it in the Amazon iOS app. Okay, let's go back to the topic. What can we see? We want to see the SwiftUI views, of course, especially for the onboarding, because it seems very interesting the way it's been implemented. But first, I wanted to have a look if there was some kind of caching. Since it seems to be a web view and it calls load request, I guess if there is a caching, it will be a cache that relies on the HTTP headers of the HTTP response, so nothing specific implemented inside the app. But let's just have a look, because there was this data store thing right here, and let's see. What does it do? Data store, so we are in the .h file, so the interface. So yeah, you can still fetch your article with URL. So it's interesting because and then it's like manage object context. So this seems to be using core data actually, because manage object context is something that's part of core data. And so what does it do? It fetches the article, so with some kind of database key. Okay, and then it's going to, in the article cache, set an object for a key, which is, and it's an NS cache. So interestingly, if you followed the live of last week, you see a nice link with it, a nice connection, because we saw how to use NS cache. We learned how to use NS cache last week, albeit it was in a much more modern context with async await than this code base. Okay. So it stores it in an NS cache, and NS cache, I'm not sure that it's being saved to the disk, actually. Yeah, temporarily store. So it does use a cache, but a cache that is not persisted. So it's only a session cache, we could say, which kind of makes sense. So it's a great way to see that NS cache is indeed something that you can use. What did I want to say? That you can use like in an actual app, and it's being used out there. It's not just Apple pushing it in their tutorial. And I want to see, so this WMF article, what's inside of it. So since it's core data object, its properties are probably defined in somewhere else in an extension. So I want to do navigate reveal in Finder. No, navigate reveal in Project Navigator rather. Yeah, so it's here. So we have like the key, the variant. Okay, I'm looking for the content actually. So it stores also the scroll position, which is kind of nice. Okay, image. Okay. But it seems that it doesn't store the content of the article itself. Rather, it stores the metadata about how it was viewed inside the app. So it's kind of interesting to see that it does that. So let's see. If I go back here in the view controller, at some point it's calling load request on the web view. And what I want to try and see is how is the request built actually. So let me find the web view here again, and let's see. Okay, yes, here. So what do we have inside this request? So it gets the article URL, and it creates, okay, so it creates the URL from this. So actually it does, so it only stores some metadata. It doesn't store the actual article URL. I mean, it doesn't store like the content of the article. It doesn't store an HTML in the NS cache, which once again kind of makes sense in a way, because maybe the content could change, especially in an app and a website like Wikipedia, which is editable by anyone. I guess the content of an article can change quite often, and I guess if you implement a cache for articles where there might be a lot of edits, maybe some heated debates or that kind of thing, maybe it doesn't make sense to actually implement a cache because you want your users to always see the current version that's available online. You're asking what might used for cache persistence. Uh, so it seems that this app doesn't use cache persistence per se. It uses an NS cache here, and I wanted to see like, is the manage object context used? You can see there is the, yeah, it sets it here. If you, what mode used for cache persistence? I'm not sure that you can persist the cache using NS cache. To be honest, I am not sure actually, because here you see it says that it's let me show it so you can see it fully. So a mutable collection you use to temporarily store transient key value pairs. So transient, it's kind of like the opposite of persisted. So yes, so on the web view, there is a setting, and just like with URL session, you have a URL cache, might not be that exact name, but this cache, you can give it its size both in memory and on disk. So indeed, it can be done that way. But in the case of Wikipedia, unless the user especially like asks for making it available offline, and I'm not sure that there is an offline mode, caching wouldn't be the best. Oh, you can do fetch online offline resources. So you can do that. So let's see if in the app I can fetch an article for offline news. So there is a revision history, all right. So here you can change the text, the font. This is to search, okay, to bookmark, and here it's for it's to get the outline. And we can pull to refresh, but I can't see something about like offline mode, or maybe like when you save something, does it make it be offline? I'm looking to see. It seems that there are some like images and resources seem to be maybe managed to be accessible offline. So maybe like these images, they are stored in the sense that it might make sense to store the images in a cache if the images are immutable, in the sense that when you change the image, you actually upload a new resource. So in that case, you have your cache, but maybe you will have resources in the cache which are no longer referenced by a newer version of the article. So it might be okay to cache more aggressively resources rather than the content of the article, which might change much more often. And you're asking, what's the design pattern used on this app? So it seems to be the model view controller that Apple used to show during their WWDC talks and demo codes back then, but we haven't seen like coordinators or anything like that. Most of the files have like a good amount of code, to be honest. You can see that it's an app that has a good amount of features. It also shows that it's not because you use a web view that the app becomes like more simple to implement. If you're ever asked to estimate like the workload for a project, the trick is to have a manager who says no, but it's in a web view, so it means that it's just like you put a URL and that's it. But there are always edge cases with web views. They are just very hard to anticipate. But here, given that we intercept basically every action on the web view, definitely you need to implement a lot of things. Okay, what could we see next? How about we look a bit at what uses SwiftUI? What is the method or RIP offline? Let's see. Where did you see that this RIP offline? Let me show it on the broadcast. So what's the method or RIP offline? Or maybe it's something like that. No, where did you see that? Trying to see where you saw that on the screen. Before offline. So I see this, I see show offline. It would have been, maybe there could have been like a method. Maybe it was called a bit something like a bit different. I don't know if I do something like that. Let me do, trying to do like regex. Apparently I don't know how to do regex correctly because I want something that starts with an R, but doesn't seem to. Oh yes, no here because yeah there is an R here. Okay, so that was a bad way of doing it. Yeah, no, can't find it. If you like have anything to help me narrow it down, let me know. But that would have been interesting to see if there was a method like to rip a lot of content. Because when it says rip offline, you think of like ripping the content of like of a DVD or a CD, like an audio CD. So brings back a lot of memories also. Interesting question for later. What are they using to collect analytics on metrics? That's very interesting. You know what? Let's try it because it's easy to see. So analytics. So there is something about analytics, definitely. We can see it's being collected and what's being used. I would love to look into the app delegate, for instance, because it's usually where these things are created. Or, oh yeah, event platform client. That seems to be the thing. So event platform clients collects events in an input buffer. Okay. So is it something that they have implemented themselves, or is it some kind of third party, either open source or a paid tool? So let's see. So no, and then there is a database here. So yeah, it uses core data. So it seems to be something that they have implemented themselves. In a way, it kind of makes sense for something like Wikipedia not to rely on Google Analytics or any of the Firebase or of the analytics solutions which are actually owned by Google under the hood. So it seems that they have implemented their own thing. You can see like with some codable conformance and everything. So that's quite interesting. I won't go too deep into it because it's a bit outside of the topic of what I want to show you. But if you want to have a look how it's implemented, you can see an example that is not too big. So you can probably see like the patterns used, because when you want to do an analytics library, basically, the question that you need to answer, they are more like system design questions, but it's like, how do you make sure that you don't make a network call for every single event? So how do you buffer efficiently? What happens if the user kills the app before you've sent your buffer? So it's this kind of very interesting system design questions that you might want to learn about, and this seems to be the perfect example for it because it's not too big, not too small. So you can spend maybe like 1 hour looking at the code and get some useful learnings from it. So let's see. Now let's have a look at Swift UI. And we saw that the onboarding was using Swift UI quite a lot. So where did we get that? Yeah, I searched for import Swift UI actually, and then I saw this onboarding stuff that made me think like, oh, I think this is what we saw at the beginning. As we can see, yeah, onboarding view. So it seems that simple views are implemented, simple and modern views are implemented using Swift UI. So I'm trying to load the preview. We'll see if it works or not, because in large projects, previews working is never a given. So we'll see. But so we have this onboarding view, which has a view model. So we are in the MVVM pattern this time, which makes sense because when SwiftUI started, it was the popular pattern. So yeah, woo. we have all of these errors when trying to build the preview. So don't be mad, but I will not be attempting to debug all of these errors during during the live stream. And I think this is, oh yeah, there are way too many of them. So let's stop the preview right here and let's rather look at the code. So we have the onboarding view, and so there is a Z stack, a scroll view, and then a V stack, which with the title, okay, and then for each cells in the view model, then we have an onboarding cell being displayed. So what's this onboarding cell? It says, okay, if there is an icon, it shows it, and then there is a title and a subtitle. Okay, and I want to see like if we have even more choice, because so onboarding view, and then we have the view controller that just wraps the Swift UI view, and you pass in closures in order to be able to interact with the buttons in Swift UI. So that's very interesting. To be honest, I have written code like this at work, where you have a Swift UI view, then you embed it into a hosting view, and then you just pass in closures that will be triggered by the buttons in Swift UI, and this way you can make your Swift UI view interact with its outside world without being aware of it, because the Swift UI view only sees a closure that it calls with maybe some arguments, and that's quite a nice pattern when you want to introduce Swift UI into an app that already has an existing and large code base. And so I wanted to go back to the onboarding view. So you're asking, Amir, strange for each, why did they use the index? Yeah, why did they use the count? Because they could have said for each and iterating over the indices. Maybe because it's like, I don't know, maybe they are into like old-fashioned stuff. Because the cells themselves, they could have made the cells identifiable, and it would have saved them a lot of difficulties. Or maybe they could have just done something like I don't know if you can do like something, but like view model dot cells dot indices. Does this build or not? So if you do for each cells, I'm not sure if you need to confirm to identifiable or not. Wow, I have so many errors. Oh no, I think it's no, it's not finished building. I think it's just like the remnants of when I tried to use the preview. Because I was able to run the app in the simulator and build it when we started, and I didn't change the code. Or at least I don't think. Ah yeah, I did. Yeah, build succeeded, okay. So you can do it like that, for instance. You can do it like that. Actually, it would be maybe a bit better, because here you can see that, oh, it's so weird. It starts at 1, then iterate over the count, and it does a -1 every time. So honestly, I would much rather do something like that, for instance, and then here use the correct index. So yeah, I definitely agree. Like this is not the best way to write it, I think, just because it's quite error prone, and here you only use cell once, but every time that you use it, you need to do this -1 basically, so this offset to get the true index, and you're bound to forget to do it at some point if your code grows in complexity. So indeed, I think this is not the best way to do it. What's interesting is that you see they pass explicitly the closures in the init of the views. Me, when I work in such views, I was injecting the closures into the environment. This way, you can access them even from views which might not be at the top level, because otherwise, here it works because they have one SwiftUI view, which is in a hosting controller, and that's it. But if you have several child views in SwiftUI, you don't want to pass the closures manually from the init of one to the init of the other, because it becomes like a nightmare so fast. And so injecting them into the environment can be quite nice. And yeah, even the count isn't great, because it might not be. So yeah, so this code is not the best at all. So don't take example on this code. Definitely not. But do take example on it for the way of adding SwiftUI code into an existing and large UIKit code base, because I think it's a pretty good example of it. And from what I'm seeing right here in the big picture, the way they are doing it seems aligned with what I have done in the past. So why not pass the closures into the view model? Me, I would put them into the environment and not bother with who owns them, to be honest. The thing is, if you put the closure into the view model, then you're going to end up in the view calling a method on the view model that calls the closures. So it really begs the question, like, does it make sense? If the view model doesn't need to do anything when the closure is called, you might not want to do it. And in this kind of architecture, usually what's going to happen is that you're going to have a button at some point that's going to trigger an action that's going to do something completely outside of the realm of SwiftUI. Like, for instance, calling a method on a shared instance or something like that. And so you definitely don't want your view model in SwiftUI to be aware of it. You want to insulate SwiftUI as much as possible from the rest of your app. Actually, in a way, it's kind of similar in a pattern way to what we've seen with the WebView. This app was using WebViews as a rendering engine, and then whenever someone would interact with a link on the WebView, it would trigger a custom behavior. This is very similar to what's happening here with SwiftUI. The app uses SwiftUI for its rendering engine, which is easier to use than UIKit. But then, as soon as you interact with something, you have closures that are called and which are provided by a part of the code that is outside of SwiftUI. So it's nice to see that these two technologies, which might seem very unrelated, so HTML and SwiftUI, actually follow the same pattern when you want to integrate them into an app. And you might have heard people say that, and I think myself I've said it in videos, that because SwiftUI is more descriptive and declarative than UIKit, SwiftUI is closer to HTML than UIKit is. Here you can see a great typical real-world example of why it can make sense to draw some comparison between HTML and SwiftUI. They are not the same. There is much more complexity and probably much more powerful stuff that you can do in SwiftUI than HTML on an iOS app, of course. But at a pattern level, at a system design level, we can see a very interesting similarity. I see a remark, the view model should be a let here. Where is the view here? I think it could be a let because it's not an optional, so you have to provide one. So let's see. If I make it a let, does it crash? But to be honest, yeah, I think all of these things here, arguably, I think they could all be let because anyway, you're going to pass them through the init, and you will probably never set. Maybe it could be set by the. So actually, a let is valid, so it's not changed. It's not changed anywhere else. But maybe the UI hosting controller might set them. So I mean, it could have set them. So let's see. If I go into the UI hosting controller here, so you can see that when is the view created? So it creates the view here and passes in the view model. And then, so indeed the view model is passed through the init, but then the other, like the two closures, they are passed afterward. So for the closures, the var makes sense. For the view model, indeed, the var doesn't make sense, and you can still build without it. So indeed, that's a great remark. There is no reason to not make it a let and keep it as a var. You could put it as a let. It should still be working. Okay. I'm looking at the time. We are close to 1 hour and a half of live stream. I want to go like something like a bit shy of 2 hours, but I don't want to spend like too much time because at some point like The goal is that if you want to explore the code base, you do it on your own. But with this live stream, I try to cover what everyone might be interested in, but then everyone will have their own like special interest. So maybe we could have a look at the test. That could be something interesting to finish, to have a look at the test. So let's see. Do we have some testing code somewhere? Yes, we have tests. We even have test plans. So test, manual tests. So for instance, article cache reading manual test. So it seems that there is some kind of helper that pulls data from fixtures. Okay, so I guess some hard-coded data that's used instead of making network calls. And so test basic network no connection with cached article. So apparently you can cache an article. So yeah, maybe you can do it because it's done through the cache of the web view. Oh yes, here there is this. So basic VC did receive, and you can see that there is an idea of a URL scheme task here. So what is that? So there is this cache that is indeed enabled, it seems. And so it says, okay, so it creates these expectations. So for loading HTML, image, and CSS. So what does it do when there is a data callback? So it says, okay, you take the string, okay, it creates some URL string, all right, so a hard-coded string to an article, it seems. And then it tries to decode what's been downloaded, and it looks to say, okay, so basically it makes sense that you are getting what was stored, I guess, in the cache before, I guess. You see, first time I see tests are made for device only. What do you mean? You mean that you cannot run the test in the simulator? Where, and if so, where did you see that? Because I missed that. Okay, and here it's doing, so I guess what it's doing is that here it's loading some fixtures, pulling the data from fixtures and putting it in the cache, and then it makes the call for that same data and make sure that what's being pulled from the cache is indeed what was saved by this method. Yeah, and it's what it's doing right here. So what is inside this file called basic.html? Let's see. If I search for something like called basic.html, no. Do we have something called maybe if I search here and I do something like, or maybe it's in utilities, fixture utilities. Okay, so no, it's just like a bundle methods, but where are the actual file? And then there are way more tests. There are the manual tests. So if I look for basic, not like that, correctly spelled. I don't know where that file is saved. Where did I see the call to it? So it was here. So from content of file, so in directory fixture, okay. It's supposed to be in a directory called fixture. So maybe I'm like, maybe it's at a higher level, or if I search for it here. Yeah, in directory. Oh, it says path for resource. So I'm wondering, like, maybe this path is being, it's like, maybe the data is downloaded the first time. Maybe it's downloaded the first time from the internet and then being stored, like, being stored in the bundle of the, no, because the bundle is immutable. So it shouldn't be that. Plus it's fixtures with an S and here. So maybe I should just look at the command that you were mentioning first. Maybe I would have found a lot of answers if I had begun by doing that. So let's see. Let me go back to the... Okay, so see comment on top, line 22. Or maybe, yeah, maybe a CI flow that adds the file indeed, and they are not committed. Yeah, that's very possible. That since the content might change, maybe that there is some CI file or something like that. Um, but just when you say line 22, which file do you mean? Because I don't seem to find it. Oh, wait, I'm not in the correct file. It was this file right here. Okay, it was this file. Okay, now I got it. Thank you. And so, reminder, these tests need to be run on device and in airplane mode, otherwise they won't work. Oh, I think what they mean is that you could run it in the simulator, but you need a way for your simulator to be in an equivalent of airplane mode. And you cannot really do that because if you try to do that on your Mac, you will cut the connection and then maybe your CI will break because there won't be any connection anymore. So I think that's the reason why, because you cannot simulate airplane mode on the simulator. I know some tools like Rocket Sim claim that they do it. I'm not sure how they do it, to be honest, but that might be the reason why, because of the need for airplane mode. Might be that, or it might be something more subtle. I don't know. And so let's see at the other test, like for instance, so it's just like utilities here. There are a lot of utilities. So they've definitely invested in their testing. And so for instance, link parsing test. So let's look at that. So you give it this, and it wants to make sure that the domain is wikipedia.org, the language code is EN, and the title is Tyrannosaurus. So this is like this is the business logic of the app, because it gets the URL and then it needs to break them down into their components in a way that the app can then use to query all of the data. So that's super useful, and that's definitely the kind of test that you would expect such an app to write. Yeah, there are a lot of H&M files. I didn't expect to see that many of them, to be honest. But yeah, today is definitely like a Objective C day. Oh, and it might be in the paid version of Rocket Sim in a way, which kind of makes sense because it's one of the features that that would make you pay for it. So I worked on subscription apps, so I think like I am not allowed to complain about features being put behind a paywall, because it's what pays my salary. So like it's a bit harder to complain when you are on the other side of the thing, of the paywall actually. But yeah, so they do have this feature. Okay, so there are several examples like that. And links from links. That's interesting. It does a site URL, titled URL, okay. And then, so titled URL, okay, so it's like, it's creating, so like it takes the data, and from the data, it's building the URL, and it checks that it builds the URL like correctly, and with the right encoding, like the title, the space is turned into an underscore, for instance. So that's quite interesting. Same thing for the fragment, it's correctly encoded. So that's a good example. Arguably, these tests are quite easy to write because we're testing like pure functions here. So pure functions are easy to test because they don't have any dependencies. Often the hard part is how do you turn your code into pure functions so that you can test it efficiently. That's usually where the challenge lies. Special characters, of course. So you can see that they cover they have quite a good test coverage. But once again, if you're an open source project and you rely on external contributors, I'm not sure what they do, but if they do, then investing on tests makes a lot of sense, because you want to be able to rely a lot on your CI to make sure that no one has broken a feature by mistake, because it could be quite a big problem. And if you need to retest everything manually every time, then your release process is going to become a nightmare, and your project is going to become stale quite fast, unfortunately. So what do we have else? Something about substring, for instance. So testing that the method to safely substring, so to substring without getting a crash if you subscript outside of if you substring outside of the bounds, seems to have also its tests. Oh, date formatter. That's interesting because yeah, something like Wikipedia dealing a lot with dates. So it takes a timestamp and then it does run parallel tests with locales. So it's like running the same test several times but with different locales. So that's kind of interesting of an approach to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to run my test with all locales to make sure that it works. First time I see this approach, but it's quite interesting to see it. Okay. What else do we have that could be interesting to cover? URL test. So here it's testing. It's testing that some URLs there is an extension that says whether or not it opens in browser or in the app, I guess. And so it's testing that some say false, some say true. Like for instance, if you want to access an article, it's supposed to show it in the app, it seems. But if you want to show a user profile, then it should happen in the web app, or rather in Safari. Is there regex generic solution in this code base? Can you give an example of what you have in mind by a regex generic? Because I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm looking a few things. Oh, they have like tests for async map. So test async map results are mapped to correct items even if received out of order. So it seems that they have an async map to map asynchronously, and they want to make sure that items in the result array are in the same order than items in the input array, even if they are received in a different order, which will be the case most of the time. How do they deal with testing infrastructure? Good question. So it seems that they have fixtures that with local data. It seems to be that from what we've seen. I'm looking to see maybe what I can see more in utilities. There are mocks also. So they have something to mock the UI of the device, apparently to mock the UI orientation, and basically it allows them to post notification to say that orientation did change. So it seems that they have this, and then mocks for core location. So it's more mocking about the device. So it seems they want to be able to mock changes of state in the physical state of the device, and then they have fixtures for what is their data, it seems. And for the persistence, it seems that they have some temporary data store, and it seems that they have some kind of like data which is like already, I guess, already like they took a snapshot at some point, and they are loading this snapshot back into the database. So it seems that's how they do it. They have some idea of default values for user default, it seems. Here they have something about reflection. So yeah, enumerate properties. So that's very useful, especially when you do Objective-C. Objective-C, since it's very dynamic, you can enumerate all the properties. So kind of like a mirror in Swift, but even more powerful because you can read and write. So these things used to be very powerful when you wanted to write testing code that would maybe like do something for each property of an object. Oh, here we have a file in Swift. That's interesting. So, wow, they have like this. So, article test helpers. So, they have a basic caching web controller. So, it seems that they create a web view controller that's going to have a web view and that's going to implement some minimal caching. And then they have some fixture data. They set it up by creating a temporary store. Okay. Okay, they get the data. Okay. They pull data from fixture, so what we've seen already before. They stub complete mobile HTML response. Okay. That's a lot of code. But I guess what they want to do, because I'm looking for whether it's actually a test. What does the test do? Oh no, it's just a helper. Oh yes, but it's what we've it's what we've seen in the very first file actually. Remember, like when I was here, it was doing articles test helpers. So it's doing that, and it seems that they have implemented a simple version of the. That's interesting because it's like rather than testing the articles view controller, they have implemented a simple version of it that's only like pulls data and store it in the cache. So I'm not sure why they have done this. I'm not sure what's the benefit of doing that. I guess there is a reason for it. When you see it like that, it seems a bit weird because it feels like instead of testing what's in their code, they are implementing something additionally. But I guess there is a reason to have this more simple, I guess this allows them to simulate the app, and they don't want to test the app itself, but rather how some components interact with the app. So in a way, maybe if you think about it in a layer, maybe they see it as the way that most of the app depends on the web view, and so what they want to do is that they want to simulate the web view, and so rather than using the web view that's in the app, they use a more simple web view with a much more simple behavior and a much more predictable behavior than what you get into the app. But I'm not sure that I get the full picture of this, to be honest. I would probably need to spend a bit more time to understand it. Also, there are not a lot of comments, so maybe there are some documentation. There is some documentation in the GitHub that might help to understand what's happening. Actually, you know what? Let's look at. There is probably the README is there somewhere. So let's have a look at the README. Not this one. I was looking for the README. Maybe it's just not been added to the Xcode project, but we can look at the README here to see if there is there are some development guides, testing. Okay, they explain more like how the project is configured. Oh, event logging document. So what do they say here? Okay, it's a dead link. But maybe if you tweak the URL, you might find maybe there is still a current version of this event_logging.md document, and you can find it. Okay, what do we have here in the contributing? So setup. Okay, what can I work on? So actually, you can solve bugs in the app if you're interested in trying to do that. If you have the time and the motivation for it, it seems to be possible. But I don't see any documentation really on why they have architectured the project the way that they did. So maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Trying to think if there is anything else I could cover, but I think it's been 1 hour and 40 minutes, and I think we've already done a nice tour of this app. Personally, I'm pretty glad with what we've covered, because when I started this live stream, I was I'm not sure what I'm going to show them, because beforehand I just checked the project build. I wanted to make sure that I could make it build, but I didn't explore the project that much more. So actually, the fact that it uses the web view, I've discovered it live, just like you. So it was very interesting to go through this code base and discover how it's implemented. Definitely, if you wanted to dig deeper into it, it would take you a lot of time. I'm sure there would be some interesting learnings, but I'm sure also that everyone's time is limited. So I would say, if you've seen some parts that you might want to learn a bit more, please feel free to check them out. And also remember that in a bit more than 1 hour and 30 minutes, we uncover some interesting facts on how the Wikipedia app works, and more specifically, we uncovered 2 interesting facts: the way that it uses web views to render content, but then hooks all of the interaction with the web view to native code. That's super interesting. So in terms of system design, it was really great to get that knowledge, and also the way that the Wikipedia app embeds SwiftUI code into an existing and a large UIKit code base is very interesting. I told you that it resonates a lot with the kind of pattern that I've used myself at work. So honestly, I'm thinking maybe at some point I might want to do a video on this, on how to embed SwiftUI in a UIKit code base. And of course, I'm not going to develop a large app just for the sake of it, so I will simulate it. But the fact that you can use hosting controllers, that you can pass closures that are called in reaction to user events. I think this pattern is quite useful, and I've seen it do more good than harm in my case. So I would be willing to advocate for it. I see one question or remark. Testing might be limited by the MVC design pattern and the fact they relied on inheritance for articles. So yeah, I'm sure testing was quite limited by the architectural choices. However, we can say there are still a lot of tests, so much more than I would have expected, to be honest, and much more than what the typical iOS app created 8 years ago would have, to be also honest. So I think that it's still a good example. But yes, indeed, since there is a lot of inheritance and a lot of like large and not to say massive view controllers, it's probably harder to test features more like atomically. And maybe what's being tested is all of the logic around how to parse, format, and store data locally. Maybe there are some UI tests for how the content renders, but maybe there are no tests to say that, okay, when I click on this button, I want to test that this action does happen, in the way that, for instance, that TCA allows you to do it by decoupling everything. Definitely, you don't have this same level of granularity here. Even though, to be fair, I didn't cover the whole testing target in details, and we've seen that there are tons of files inside of them. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, when looking deeper into it, we could find some very good surprises and the testing going much further than what we could initially think. And I think we are getting close to the end of this live stream. So for those of you who have followed live and made very good remarks in the chat and asked very good questions, thank you a lot. Definitely for these live streams, the interaction with the chat makes it for half, if not more, of the quality of the live stream, because if I just stumble on the live stream and speak with no interruption for 2 hours, it's not super interesting, both for people who are watching it and also for myself. So thank you for being here during the live and for asking all of these questions and making all of these remarks in the chat. As I was saying, there will probably be a short pause on the live streams because I will be at WWDC next Monday, and then the following Monday I will be back in France, but probably very, very tired. So we'll see. But what I plan to do is that after WWDC, I will probably do like last year, where I had done the Let's Explore and Discover live stream. So I had done Let's Explore and Discover Swift Data, Let's Explore and Discover Swift Macros, Let's Explore and Discover TipKit also a few months after, because TipKit wasn't available immediately at the beginning. So I will probably try to do some Let's Explore and Discover live streams, where the goal is, maybe I watch the WWDC session beforehand, maybe not, but I open the code, I look at the content, and for 2 hours we explore it together. So I will try to do that. Of course, if you see topics during WWDC that you would like me to cover, let me know. You can send me messages like on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can let me know what you would like me to cover, or in the comments of this live stream. And I just have to say, so thank you again for watching. Enjoy WWDC if you are watching live, because for us WWDC is 1 week away. I hope that we will get some really exciting announcements, and that because of them, or thanks to them, I'll be able to make a lot of content around them in the following weeks and during whole summer, basically. I hope for WWDC to bring me all of my content calendar for summer. That's my hope, basically. So we'll see how it goes. And just have to say, like, thank you for watching. Enjoy your rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And see you next time. Bye bye.